The galaxy was vast, filled with wonders and dangers beyond imagining, but one thing was universally agreed upon. Humans were relics of a bygone age, or so the galactic community believed. At the heart of this perception was the simple fact that humanity had vanished from the interstellar stage centuries ago. Once known for their stubborn ingenuity and unmatched adaptability, humans had retreated to their solar system, seemingly content to leave the galaxy to its own devices. Their brief and fiery participation in galactic affairs had become the stuff of legends, and over time, those legends faded into obscurity. For Corporal Lena Tarsk of the Vrallan Defense Forces, humans were nothing more than a footnote in history, a curiosity she had studied briefly in military academy. Her current assignment, however, was anything but a footnote. Lena had been stationed on Helix 7, a barren mining world on the edge of contested space, and it was about as exciting as watching atmospheric processors churn out breathable air. "Another glorious day in the service," she muttered, leaning against the observation window of the outpost's main control tower. Below her, massive excavators chewed into the planet's crust, extracting rare minerals that were apparently vital to the ongoing war effort. The Vrallans were locked in a bitter conflict with the aggressive ZYX coalition, and every ounce of helixite ore was shipped to fuel the construction of warships and weapons. Lena glanced at her squadmate, Private Rix, a wiry Thalvian with pale green skin and perpetually twitching antennae. He was engrossed in calibrating a targeting system, muttering to himself as he worked. "Hey, Rix," Lena said, her tone light. "You ever wonder why we're stuck babysitting miners while everyone else is out there actually fighting the war?" Rix didn't look up. "Because we're expendable?" Lena snorted. "Speak for yourself." "I'm irreplaceable." Their banter was interrupted by a sudden alarm. Red lights bathed the control room, and a mechanical voice droned. "Proximity alert. Unidentified vessels detected." Lena straightened, her hand instinctively reaching for her sidearm. "What now?" Rix scrambled to the console, his antennae quivering as he studied the incoming data. "3 ships, heading straight for us. ZYX signatures." Lena's stomach dropped. The ZYX coalition was notorious for its brutal tactics, and if they were targeting Helix 7, it wasn't for a friendly chat. She activated her comms. "Command, this is Corporal Tarsk. We've got incoming ZYX vessels. Requesting immediate support." The response crackled through the static, cold, and unsympathetic. "Support unavailable. Hold your position." Lena clenched her fists. "Hold our position? Against 3 ZYX ships? Are they serious?" Rix's antennae twitched nervously. "What do we do, Lena?" She glanced around the control room, her mind racing. The outpost had minimal defenses, just a few automated turrets and a handful of personnel, none of whom were trained for a full-scale assault. "We do our job," Lena said finally, her voice steady. "We hold the line." As the ZYX ships descended, the outpost erupted into chaos. Alarms blared, miners scrambled for cover, and the automated turrets sprang to life, firing at the approaching vessels. The ZYX ships returned fire, their energy cannons ripping through the outpost's defenses with ruthless efficiency. Lena and Rix took cover in the control tower, coordinating what little resistance they could muster. "Redirect power to the turrets," Lena ordered. "We need to slow them down." Rix's hands flew over the controls. "I'm on it. But this isn't going to hold them for long." Lena grimaced as she watched one of the turrets explode in a fiery blast. He was right. They were outgunned and outnumbered. If they didn't think of something fast, Helix 7 would fall, and with it, the valuable helixite ore that the Vrallans so desperately needed. The situation took an unexpected turn when a lone, unmarked ship appeared on the horizon. It was an old, battered vessel, its hull scarred and its design unmistakably human. The ship swooped in low, its thrusters kicking up plumes of dust as it landed near the outpost. Lena stared at the ship in disbelief. "Is that human?" Rick squinted at the viewscreen. "I thought humans were a myth." Before Lena could respond, the ship's ramp lowered, and a figure emerged. The human was tall and broad-shouldered, clad in worn but functional armor. His face was weathered, his eyes sharp and calculating. He carried himself with an air of quiet confidence, as if stepping onto a battlefield was as natural as breathing. The human strode toward the control tower, ignoring the chaos around him. Lena and Rix exchanged glances before hurrying to meet him. "Who the hell are you?" Lena demanded, her sidearm trained on the stranger. The human raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. "Name's Captain Elias Carter. I heard you've got a ZYX problem." Lena's eyes narrowed. "And you just happened to show up in the middle of an attack?" Carter shrugged. "Call it good timing." Rix's antennae twitched. "What do you want?" "I want to help," Carter said simply. "But if you'd rather handle this yourselves, I can leave." Lena hesitated. There was something about Carter's demeanor that made her believe he could back up his words. And right now, they needed all the help they could get. "Fine," she said. "But if you try anything, I'll shoot you myself." Carter smirked. "Fair enough. Now, let's see what we're working with." Carter quickly assessed the outpost's defenses, his sharp eyes taking in every detail. "Your turrets are toast, and your personnel aren't combat trained. We're going to need to get creative." Lena folded her arms. "And you have a plan?" "I've got a few tricks up my sleeve," Carter said, "but I'm going to need your help." For the next hour, Carter led the outpost's defenders in a desperate bid to fortify their position. He repurposed mining equipment into makeshift weapons, set traps using volatile helixite, and coordinated the remaining personnel with a precision that spoke of years of battlefield experience. As the ZYX forces closed in, Lena found herself grudgingly impressed. Carter's tactics were unorthodox but effective, and his calm under pressure was infectious. "Where did you learn to fight like this?" she asked as they prepared for the next wave. Carter glanced at her, a faint smile playing at his lips. "Let's just say humans have a knack for war." The first wave of ZYX infantry breached the perimeter, their hulking forms clad in jagged armor. They advanced with ruthless efficiency, their weapons cutting down anything in their path. But Carter was ready. "Now," he shouted, triggering a series of traps. Explosions ripped through the ZYX ranks as helixite charges detonated, sending shards of metal and debris flying. Lena and Rix joined the fight, picking off the survivors with precision shots. For a moment, it seemed like they might actually hold their ground. But then the second wave arrived. The ZYX brought reinforcements, heavy artillery and combat drones that overwhelmed the outpost's defenses. The situation grew dire, and Lena realized they couldn't hold out much longer. "We're out of options," she said, her voice tight with frustration. "Not yet," Carter replied. "I've got one last move." He activated a comm device on his wrist, and moments later, a series of explosions lit up the horizon. The ZYX ships in orbit were under attack from another human vessel. Lena stared in disbelief. "You brought backup?" Carter grinned. "I never fight alone." As the ZYX forces faltered, Carter led a final counterattack, driving the invaders back. By the time the dust settled, the outpost was battered but standing, and the ZYX were in full retreat. When the battle was over, Lena approached Carter, her expression a mix of gratitude and curiosity. "You're not just a random mercenary," she said. "Who are you, really?" Carter's smile faded, and for a moment, he looked almost weary. "I'm a reminder." "A reminder of what?" Lena asked. "Of what humans are capable of," Carter said, "and why the galaxy should never forget it." The silence after the ZYX retreat was short-lived. The outpost's once bustling corridors now carried the echoes of frantic repairs and the distant hum of machinery working overtime. Corporal Lena Tarsk leaned against the control console in the command center, her brow furrowed as she watched the radar screen. The ZYX wouldn't stay beaten for long, and she knew reinforcements were likely inbound. Captain Elias Carter, the enigmatic human who had led their successful defense, stood nearby, scanning the damage reports with the same calculated focus that had guided his actions during the battle. His armor, scorched and scarred from the fight, lent him an almost mythic air. "How long before they regroup?" Lena asked, breaking the tense quiet. "Hours, if we're lucky," Carter replied, his voice calm but grim. "ZYX don't like leaving jobs unfinished. They'll come back harder." Lena clenched her fists. "We barely survived the first wave. If they bring heavy reinforcements, we're done." Carter glanced at her, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Not if we outthink them." Rix, who had been working tirelessly to reroute power to the outpost's defenses, turned from his console, his antennae twitching nervously. With what? Half our turrets are slagged, and the miners aren't soldiers. We're sitting targets. Carter stepped closer, his commanding presence filling the room. Then we stopped thinking like targets. The Zwick's expect us to cower behind these walls, waiting to be overwhelmed. We need to surprise them. Lena raised an eyebrow. You have a plan? Always, Carter said. But it'll take guts, and a little creativity. An unlikely alliance. The plan, as Carter laid it out, was audacious and borderline insane. Rather than simply shoring up defenses, he proposed going on the offensive. The key, he explained, lay in the very thing the Zwick's wanted: Helixite. We weaponize it, Carter said, standing over a makeshift map of the outpost and surrounding terrain. Set up traps, rig explosives, and use it to draw them into a kill zone. Rix looked skeptical. Helixite is volatile. One wrong move, and we'll blow ourselves up. That's why we don't make wrong moves, Carter replied, his tone leaving no room for argument. We use their overconfidence against them. They'll expect a weak, scared outpost. Let's give them a fight they won't forget. Lena exchanged a glance with Rix. The plan was risky, but the alternative was certain defeat. She turned back to Carter, her jaw set. All right, Captain. Let's do it. Preparation begins. Under Carter's direction, the outpost sprang to life. Miners, engineers, and even non-combat personnel pitched in, transforming the barren landscape around the facility into a lethal battlefield. Excavation equipment was repurposed into improvised weapons, while tunnels were reinforced to serve as fallback positions. Lena and Rix worked alongside the others, their initial doubts slowly giving way to admiration for Carter's unyielding determination. The human seemed to thrive under pressure, his calm demeanor and quick thinking inspiring confidence, even in the face of overwhelming odds. You've done this before, Lena remarked as she helped Carter rig a series of Helixite charges near the outpost's perimeter. More times than I'd like to admit, Carter replied, his hands moving with practiced efficiency. Humans have a history of fighting uphill battles. Lena frowned. Why? Why not just avoid the fight? Carter paused, meeting her gaze. Because sometimes, running isn't an option. Sometimes, you have to stand your ground. Uncovering the mystery. As the preparations continued, Lena couldn't shake her curiosity about Carter's past. His skill and confidence suggested a military background, but the human had been evasive when asked about his origins. During a rare moment of quiet, she approached him. You're not just some wandering mercenary, are you? Carter chuckled. Is it that obvious? Blatantly, Lena said. So what's your story? Carter leaned against a stack of crates, his expression thoughtful. I was a soldier once. Earth's military. Back when we still had a seat at the galactic table. Lena crossed her arms. And now? Now, Earth's a memory most species have forgotten, Carter said, his voice tinged with bitterness. We pulled back, left the galaxy to its politics and wars. But that doesn't mean we stopped watching. Lena tilted her head. Watching for what? For moments like this, Carter said. Moments when the galaxy needs to remember what humans can do. The calm before the storm. As night fell over Helix 7, the outpost was as ready as it could be. Traps had been set, weapons distributed, and fallback plans established. The once disorganized group of miners and engineers now moved with a sense of purpose, their fear tempered by resolve. Lena stood on the observation platform, watching the horizon for any sign of the ZYX reinforcements. Carter joined her, his presence steadying despite the tension in the air. You think this'll work? Lena asked. Carter's gaze remained fixed on the distance. It'll work. The question is how much we'll have to sacrifice to make it happen. Lena nodded, her jaw tightening. If we survive this, the galaxy owes us. Carter smirked. Surviving is step 1. Step 2 is making sure the galaxy doesn't forget who made it happen. The ZYX return. The first sign of the ZYX reinforcements was a low rumble that shook the ground beneath their feet. Moments later, the radar lit up with dozens of signatures. Infantry carriers, combat drones, and a massive siege walker that loomed like a metal colossus against the darkened sky. They're bringing the big guns, Rix said, his voice trembling as he studied the radar. Good, Carter said, his tone sharp. The bigger they are, the harder they fall. As the ZYX forces advanced, the traps Carter had set began to spring. Explosions lit up the battlefield, throwing the attackers into disarray. The helixite charges sent plumes of fire and shrapnel through their ranks, forcing them to slow their advance. Lena and Rix coordinated the outpost's defenses, directing fire from the remaining turrets and leading small squads to reinforce vulnerable positions. The miners, once untrained and frightened, now fought with a grim determination, their makeshift weapons proving surprisingly effective. The Siege Walker. The tide of the battle shifted when the Siege Walker reached the perimeter. The massive machine shrugged off the helixite traps like they were little more than fireworks, its heavy cannons obliterating anything in their path. We need to take that thing out, Lena said, her voice filled with urgency. It'll level the outpost if we don't stop it. Carter nodded. I'll handle it. Alone? Lena asked, incredulous. Carter grinned. Humans don't do half measures. Before Lena could argue, Carter grabbed a pack of helixite charges and sprinted toward the walker, using the chaos of the battlefield as cover. Lena watched in stunned silence as the human weaved through enemy fire with a precision that bordered on superhuman. The walker's fall. Carter reached the walker's legs, planting the charges with practiced efficiency. He climbed higher, dodging the machine's sweeping turrets and finding its weak points. With one final effort, he detonated the charges, sending the colossal machine crashing to the ground in a fiery explosion. The battlefield fell silent for a moment, the ZYX forces stunned by the loss of their greatest weapon. Then, with a roar of renewed determination, the outpost's defenders surged forward, driving the remaining attackers into retreat. Aftermath. As the smoke cleared, Carter returned to the outpost, his armor scorched but his expression triumphant. The defenders cheered, their disbelief giving way to exhilaration. Against all odds, they had held the line. Lena approached Carter, shaking her head in amazement. You're insane, you know that? Carter chuckled. Takes one to know one. You saved us, Lena said, her tone serious. But why? Why risk your life for an outpost full of strangers? Carter's smile faded, and his gaze turned distant. Because that's what humans do. When the odds are stacked against us, we fight. And we remind the galaxy why it should never underestimate us. With the ZYX defeated, the outpost stood as a testament to human ingenuity and resilience. But Lena couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The galaxy had forgotten humanity's legacy, but now, it was about to remember. The hours following the ZYX retreat were a frenzy of preparation. The defenders of Helix 7 knew their victory was temporary. The ZYX wouldn't let such a critical resource slip through their grasp. In the control room, Corporal Lena Tarsk stood at the tactical console, her fingers tapping against its surface as she reviewed the limited resources at their disposal. What do we have left? She asked, her voice edged with tension. Not enough, Rix replied, his antennae twitching anxiously. We've got one functioning turret, a handful of drones running on fumes, and miners armed with scavenged weapons. If the ZYX bring their fleet, we're done. Lena glanced at Captain Elias Carter, who stood nearby with arms crossed, his expression calm and focused. The human had been the linchpin of their survival so far, but even he couldn't conjure miracles from thin air. Or so she thought. They'll come back hard, Carter said, his voice steady. Probably with orbital bombardment and ground forces to mop up the rest. But we can beat them. Lena folded her arms, raising an eyebrow. How? We're running on fumes, Carter. Carter's lips curved into a faint smile. We stopped thinking like defenders. The plan. The ZYX were a ruthless and efficient war machine, their strategies relying on overwhelming firepower and intimidation. Carter's plan was simple in concept but required precision and nerves of steel, turn their strength into a weakness. They're expecting us to dig in and defend the outpost, Carter explained, pointing to the holographic map. We won't. Instead, we'll lure them into a trap. He outlined the strategy, abandon the outpost's outer perimeter, and create a false vulnerability. When the ZYX forces advanced, the defenders would strike from concealed positions, using helixite charges and mining equipment as improvised weapons. Lena frowned. That's a gamble. If they see through it. They won't, Carter interrupted. The Zhueks see us as prey. They don't expect us to fight like predators. Rix shifted uneasily. Predators? You mean humans? Carter's grin widened. Exactly. Setting the trap. The defenders worked tirelessly to execute Carter's plan. Miners and engineers rigged explosives along key choke points, creating a network of traps designed to cripple the advancing Zhueks forces. Heavy mining drills were repositioned to serve as makeshift artillery, while the outpost's remaining drone fleet was outfitted with helixite payloads for kamikaze strikes. Carter oversaw every detail, his leadership unshakable despite the daunting odds. He moved among the defenders, offering words of encouragement and sharing tactical insights that seemed drawn from a lifetime of experience. Lena couldn't help but marvel at his composure. You've done this before, haven't you? Carter didn't look up from the charges he was setting. Enough to know it works. She hesitated before asking the question that had been nagging at her. Why did humanity really retreat from the galaxy? Carter paused, his expression unreadable. We didn't retreat. We regrouped. The galaxy moved on, and we let it until now. The Zhueks return. As dawn broke over the barren expanse of Helix 7, the defenders spotted the first signs of the Zhueks reinforcements. A fleet of angular ships descended through the atmosphere, their engines roaring like thunder. The flagship, a massive dreadnought bristling with weapons, hovered ominously above the battlefield. From the control room, Rix monitored the enemy's approach. They're bringing everything, he said, his voice trembling. Ground troops, drones, artillery, we're outmatched. Not yet, Carter said, his voice firm. Remember, they think they've already won. Let's remind them what humans are capable of. The battle begins. The Zhueks advanced in force, their infantry storming the outpost's abandoned perimeter, while their drones scouted for resistance. The defenders remained hidden, their traps lying in wait. When the Zhueks reached the first choke point, Carter gave the signal. Now. The ground erupted as helixite charges detonated, engulfing the lead Zhueks forces in a cascade of fire and shrapnel. The survivors faltered, their ranks thrown into disarray, but the defenders didn't give them time to regroup. Miners armed with plasma cutters and modified drills emerged from their hiding spots, striking with surprising ferocity. Lena led a squad of defenders in a flanking maneuver, cutting through the enemy with a combination of precision and determination. Rix, coordinating from the control room, deployed the drones. The small, agile machines zipped through the battlefield, detonating their helixite payloads against Zhueks artillery and supply lines. The explosions illuminated the battlefield, each one a testament to the defenders' ingenuity. The siege walkers return. The battle raged on, but the defenders' momentum was tested when the Zhueks deployed their ace, a newly repaired siege walker, even larger and more heavily armed than before. The massive machine marched across the battlefield, its cannons reducing defensive positions to rubble. Lena cursed under her breath. Carter, that thing's going to tear us apart. Carter's expression hardened. Not if we take it out first. He explained his plan. Use the drones to distract the walker while a small team planted charges on its legs. It was a risky maneuver, but the only chance they had. I'll go, Carter said, strapping a pack of charges to his back. Lena stepped forward. Not alone, you won't. I'm coming with you. Carter smirked. Thought you'd say that. The walkers fall. The two of them approached the walker under the cover of chaos, weaving through the battlefield as explosions erupted around them. The drones buzzed around the massive machine, drawing its fire and creating an opening for Carter and Lena to make their move. Reaching the walker's legs, they worked quickly to plant the charges. The ground shook with each step of the machine, its cannons firing relentlessly at the outpost. Sweat dripped down Lena's face as she armed the last charge, her hands trembling. Done, she shouted. Now what? Run. Carter yelled, grabbing her arm and pulling her away. The two sprinted back toward cover as Carter detonated the charges. The explosion tore through the walker's legs, sending the colossal machine crashing to the ground in a fiery heap. A cheer rose from the defenders, their spirits bolstered by the sight. The final push. With their siege walker destroyed, the Zhueks forces began to falter. Carter seized the opportunity to launch a final counterattack, leading the defenders in a coordinated assault that drove the remaining invaders back. The battlefield was a chaotic maelstrom of fire and smoke, but the defenders' resolve held firm. Lena fought alongside Carter, her rifle cutting down enemies with precision. For the first time, she felt a sense of pride, not just in her own actions, but in the collective strength of the defenders. They were no longer miners or engineers. They were warriors. Victory and reflection. As the last of the ZYX forces retreated, a hush fell over the battlefield. The defenders, battered but triumphant, gathered in the outpost's central courtyard. Carter stood before them, his armor scorched and his face streaked with dirt, but his eyes burned with determination. "You fought like hell today," he said, his voice carrying over the crowd. "The ZYX thought they could break us. They were wrong. They underestimated us, just like the galaxy has underestimated humanity for centuries. But today, you proved what we're capable of." Lena stepped forward, her rifle slung over her shoulder. "And you proved that humans aren't just warriors. You're leaders." Carter smiled faintly. "We lead because we've had to fight for everything we have. And now so have you." The defenders of Helix 7 had won against impossible odds, but they knew their fight wasn't over. The ZYX would return, and the galaxy would continue to test their resolve. But they were no longer afraid. For Lena, the battle was more than a victory. It was a revelation. Humanity wasn't just surviving on the edges of the galaxy. They were waiting, watching, and preparing to remind everyone why they had once been feared and respected. And as Captain Elias Carter looked to the stars, a glint of determination in his eyes, he knew this was only the beginning. The battlefield on Helix 7 was a stark reminder of the price of survival. Smoke rose from shattered terrain, mingling with the metallic tang of scorched helixite. The defenders, miners, engineers, and soldiers alike, stood amidst the wreckage, their weary faces lit by the flickering flames of the ZYX siege walker. Against all odds, they had triumphed. Corporal Lena Tarsk wiped the sweat and grime from her brow, her eyes scanning the horizon. The last of the ZYX forces had retreated into the atmosphere, leaving behind only debris and unanswered questions. She turned to Captain Elias Carter, who stood at the center of the courtyard, his arms crossed over his battered armor. "They're gone," she said. "For now." "They'll be back," Carter replied, his tone calm but resolute. "But when they come, we'll be ready." Assessing the aftermath. Inside the control room, Lena, Rix, and Carter gathered to assess the outpost situation. The battle had taken a heavy toll. Half of their defenses were destroyed, and several key mining systems were offline. Yet, for the first time since the ZYX attack began, there was hope. Rix leaned over the console, his antennae twitching. "We've got limited supplies left, barely enough to repair the essentials. And we're still isolated. No reinforcements, no resupply." Lena sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. "Command silence has been deafening. They left us for dead, and we're still standing." "Barely," Rix muttered. Carter stepped forward, his voice steady. "This isn't over. The ZYX retreated, but they'll regroup. When they return, it won't just be for helixite. They'll want payback." Lena studied him, her curiosity resurfacing. "You've been through this before, haven't you? Wars, sieges. What's your story, Carter? Why are you really here?" Carter hesitated for a moment, then met her gaze. "I told you, we've been watching. Humanity may have stepped back from the galaxy, but we never stopped preparing." "For what?" Rix asked, his voice tinged with unease. "For the day the galaxy needed us again," Carter said simply. "And that day is here." A message from the past. As the defenders worked to repair the outpost, Carter gathered Lena and Rix in the underground archives, an area of the facility that had been sealed off during the attack. Inside, rows of data terminals glowed faintly, their screens displaying fragments of ancient human schematics, military logs, and tactical plans. "These are remnants of humanity's first expansion into the galaxy," Carter explained. "Back when we were more ambitious." Lena frowned. "You mean before humans disappeared from the galactic stage?" Carter nodded. "We didn't disappear. We chose to step back, to focus on rebuilding after centuries of conflict. But we didn't abandon our legacy. He activated one of the terminals, displaying a holographic projection of a massive starship, a sleek, angular design bristling with weaponry and advanced technology. "This is the Vanguard," Carter said. "One of humanity's last great warships. It was built to defend Earth, but its true purpose was to serve as a deterrent. A reminder that, even in our absence, humanity wasn't to be trifled with." Lena stared at the projection, awe creeping into her voice. "And what happened to it?" "It was hidden," Carter said, "along with other assets, tools and technology designed to protect us if we were ever threatened again. The Vanguard is still out there, waiting for the right moment." Rix's antennae twitched nervously. "And what does this have to do with us?" "Everything," Carter replied. "The ZYX think Helix 7 is just another outpost, but it's more than that. It's a key piece of a network that leads to humanity's hidden arsenal. And if we can hold this ground, we can unlock the Vanguard and turn the tide of this war." The final stand. The ZYX returned 2 days later, their fleet larger and more formidable than before. From the control tower, Lena watched as dozens of ships descended through the atmosphere, their weapons glowing ominously. At their center was a new flagship, a monolithic dreadnought that dwarfed the other vessels. "They're not messing around," Rick said, his voice trembling. Carter stood at the window, his expression unreadable. "Good. Neither are we." Under his leadership, the defenders had fortified the outpost's remaining defenses, setting new traps and positioning their limited forces for maximum effect. But this time the stakes were higher. If they failed, the ZYX wouldn't just take Helixite, they'd destroy the outpost entirely. The battle began with a barrage of orbital strikes, shaking the ground and testing the defenders' resolve. But Carter's traps, carefully placed Helixite charges and improvised mines, threw the ZYX forces into disarray once again. Lena led a squad of miners in a counterattack, using plasma cutters and modified drills to repel the enemy's ground troops. Meanwhile, Rix coordinated drone strikes from the control room, targeting key ZYX artillery positions. At the center of it all was Carter, his presence a steadying force amidst the chaos. He moved through the battlefield with precision, rallying defenders and executing tactical maneuvers that turned the tide in their favor. Activating the Vanguard. As the battle raged on, Carter revealed the final piece of his plan. Deep beneath the outpost lay an ancient relay station, a human-built device designed to send a signal to the Vanguard. If activated, it would awaken the warship from its centuries-long slumber and summon it to their aid. "We just need to buy enough time," Carter told Lena. "Once the signal is sent, the Vanguard will handle the rest." Lena nodded, determination hardening her features. "Then let's make sure we hold the line." With the ZYX forces pressing their advantage, Carter and Lena fought their way to the relay station, navigating through collapsing tunnels and enemy patrols. The device, though ancient, was still functional, its interface glowing faintly as Carter began the activation sequence. Above ground, the defenders launched a desperate counteroffensive, throwing everything they had at the ZYX dreadnought. Rix coordinated the attack, his usually nervous demeanor replaced by a quiet resolve. "Come on, Carter," he muttered under his breath. "We're running out of time." The Vanguard awakens. Just as the ZYX dreadnought prepared to deliver a killing blow to the outpost, the skies above Helix 7 lit up with a blinding flash. The Vanguard emerged from hyperspace, its sleek form gleaming against the darkness. The ancient warship unleashed a barrage of energy blasts, tearing through the ZYX fleet with surgical precision. Cheers erupted from the defenders as the ZYX forces scrambled to retreat. The Vanguard's arrival was a decisive victory, its presence a stark reminder of humanity's unmatched military prowess. A legacy reclaimed. As the dust settled, Carter stood on the observation platform, watching the Vanguard hover above the outpost. Lena joined him, her expression a mix of awe and gratitude. "You did it," she said. "You saved us." Carter shook his head. "We saved ourselves." Humanity's strength has always been in its resilience and its ability to inspire others. Lena smiled faintly. "The galaxy isn't going to forget this." "Good," Carter said. "It's time they remembered who we are." Epilogue. Word of the battle on Helix 7 spread quickly, shaking the galactic community. The Zwick's, once seen as an unstoppable force, had been humbled by a forgotten outpost and the actions of a single human. The Vanguard's reemergence sent a clear message. Humanity was back, and it wasn't to be underestimated. For Lena, the experience was transformative. She had fought alongside miners, engineers, and a human who embodied everything she had thought was a myth. Together, they had achieved the impossible. As the Vanguard prepared to leave Helix 7, Carter turned to Lena one last time. "This is just the beginning," he said. "The galaxy is waking up, and so are we." Lena nodded, watching as the warship disappeared into the stars. She knew he was right. Humanity's legacy wasn't just a story from the past. It was a promise for the future.